London, 1854. Margaret Thornfield pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the carriage window, watching raindrops race down the pane like the tears she refused to shed. The streets of London blurred beyond, grey and indistinct in the gathering dusk. The clip-clop of horses' hooves and the occasional splash as the wheels rolled through a puddle did little to drown out the painful echo of her father's final words. "It is arranged, Margaret. You will marry Lord Conrad Zeller by month's end. The contracts are signed." She had stood in her father's study, clutching the mantelpiece for support, the heat of the fire failing to warm the chill that spread through her veins. Her father, once proud, now hollow-cheeked and desperate, wouldn't meet her eyes. "Father, I don't understand. I've never even met this man. He's newly returned from abroad. His family connections are impeccable, his fortune substantial. And he wishes to marry a stranger." Her voice had risen despite her efforts to remain calm. "He wishes to marry respectably, and quickly. His mother is ill and wishes to see him settled." Her father finally looked up from his ledger. "And we need this, Margaret. The creditors are circling." Now, as the carriage turned onto the wide avenue leading to Lord Zeller's London residence, Margaret smoothed the dove-grey silk of her visiting dress. 25 years old, never married, with no prospects but a mountain of her father's debts, she knew she should be grateful. A marriage of convenience to a wealthy nobleman was more than many in her position could hope for. The carriage slowed to a halt before an imposing townhouse. Wrought iron gates opened to a courtyard where footmen waited beneath black umbrellas. Margaret gathered her courage like a cloak around her shoulders. "Miss Thornfield," announced the butler, leading her into a drawing-room where polished mahogany and velvet draperies spoke of wealth carefully cultivated over generations. He stood by the fireplace, tall, broad-shouldered, one hand resting on the mantel. The firelight caught in his dark chestnut hair, touched with bronze at the temples. When he turned, Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Lord Conrad Zeller was not the aging, desperate bachelor she had imagined. He couldn't be more than 35, with a face that spoke of intelligence and determination rather than dissipation. His eyes, a striking shade of amber, swept over her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken uncomfortably. "Miss Thornfield." He bowed with perfect courtesy. "I appreciate your agreeing to meet before the banns are read." Margaret curtsied, steadying her voice. "My lord, I believe introductions are customary before marriage, even one of practical arrangement." Something flickered in his expression, amusement, perhaps, or approval. "Indeed. Though I find convention often masks what truly matters." He gestured to a chair near the fire. "Please, sit. Tea will arrive shortly." As she settled into the chair, Margaret noticed a portrait above the mantel, a woman with the same amber eyes as Lord Zeller, though her expression was considerably warmer. "My mother," he said, following her gaze. "Painted before her illness." "I'm sorry about her health," Margaret said sincerely. "My father mentioned she wishes to see you settled. Among other things." His voice carried an edge she couldn't interpret. "But let us speak plainly, Miss Thornfield. I understand your father's circumstances." Heat flushed Margaret's cheeks. "Then you understand why I am here." "I do. But I would like you to understand why I am proposing this match." He took the chair opposite hers, leaning forward. "I need a wife who will understand that my primary focus must remain my business interests. I require a hostess for occasional necessary social functions, someone with good breeding and intelligence who won't demand what I cannot give." "And what is that, my lord?" The words escaped before she could stop them. His gaze held hers, unwavering. The romantic entanglements that seem to occupy the minds of most young ladies. "I offer financial security, my name, and respectful treatment. I do not offer romance." Margaret found herself oddly relieved rather than offended. "Then we understand each other perfectly. I seek security for my father and myself, not romantic poetry or midnight serenades." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Excellent. Then we need only discuss the practical details. For the next half hour, they spoke of wedding arrangements, living accommodations, and Margaret's duties as the future Lady Zeller. He was methodical, precise, and utterly businesslike. And yet, whenever their eyes met, something in his gaze belied his cool words, a warmth, a curiosity that seemed to reach past her careful composure. As she prepared to leave, he took her hand. His touch was warm, his fingers strong around hers. "One more thing, Miss Thornfield. While our arrangement is practical, I do not consider you merely a transaction. I will be faithful, and I expect the same. We may not have love, but we shall have honor." "Of course." The intensity of his gaze made her heart race uncomfortably. "Then I shall call tomorrow to speak with your father about the settlement details." He released her hand, but his eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary. "Until tomorrow, Miss Thornfield." In the carriage home, Margaret pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks. Lord Zeller was not what she had expected, neither an aged libertine nor a cold businessman. There had been something in his eyes when he spoke of honor, something that suggested depths beneath his controlled exterior. She reminded herself firmly that it didn't matter. Their arrangement was clear. She would gain security, he would gain a proper wife to please his mother and manage his household. Nothing more. Yet she could not forget the warmth of his hand around hers, or the promise of something unnamed in his amber gaze. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. The settlement was generous, her father's debts cleared, a substantial allowance arranged for them both. The wedding was to be small but elegant, as befitted Lord Zeller's position. Margaret had expected to feel like chattel being transferred from one owner to another. Instead, she found herself treated with unexpected consideration. Lord Zeller consulted her on the choice of their London residence. He arranged for her to interview the household staff she would soon be managing. When she expressed concern about her father living alone, he suggested setting aside a suite of rooms for him in their home. "You are most accommodating, my lord," she said one afternoon as they walked through the gardens of his country estate, where they would spend part of the year. "Conrad," he corrected. "We should use Christian names, at least in private." "Conrad," she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "And I am merely being practical. Your happiness affects the smooth running of my household, which affects my business interests." He spoke matter-of-factly, but there was that look again, something warmer than his words suggested. "Of course. Efficiency above all." She couldn't keep a touch of dryness from her voice. He stopped walking, studying her face. "Have I offended you?" "No." She shook her head. "I appreciate your honesty. Most men would dress this arrangement in pretty lies." "I dislike dishonesty in all its forms," he said. "Which is why I must tell you that while our marriage may be arranged for practical reasons, I find I am looking forward to it more than I had anticipated." Margaret felt a strange flutter in her chest. "Because of the convenience?" "Because of you." His voice deepened. "You are not what I expected, Margaret Thornfield." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the housekeeper with questions about the upcoming dinner party. The moment passed, but Margaret found herself replaying his words as she prepared for bed that night. "You are not what I expected, star." What had he expected? And why did it matter so much what he thought of her? The morning of the wedding dawned clear and crisp. Margaret stood before the mirror in her childhood bedroom, studying her reflection. The wedding gown was simpler than fashion-dictated ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, but it suited her. Her dark hair was arranged in a simple chignon, adorned with a few white roses. A knock at the door revealed her father, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You look beautiful, my girl." He took her hands in his. "Are you certain about this?" "Even now, if you wish to withdraw, I'm certain, father." She squeezed his hands. "Lord Zeller is not what we feared. He will be a good husband. A good provider, certainly. But will he make you happy?" Margaret hesitated. Happiness comes in many forms. Security, respect, these are not small things. Her father studied her face. There was a time when you spoke of love, of marrying a man who stirred your heart. Childish dreams, she said softly. We cannot afford such luxuries now. The small church was decorated with white roses and ivy. As Margaret walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she kept her eyes forward, her expression composed. Conrad waited at the altar, resplendent in a dark coat and silver waistcoat. When he turned to watch her approach, the intensity of his gaze nearly made her stumble. The ceremony was brief. Margaret spoke her vows clearly, Conrad's deep voice steady beside her. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Conrad lifted her veil and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips, brief, formal, yet somehow leaving her breathless. The wedding breakfast was held at Conrad's London home, now to be hers as well. Margaret moved through the small gathering of guests, Conrad's business associates, a few distant relatives, her father, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. This was what she had agreed to, what she had chosen. Why then did she feel this strange hollowness beneath her ribs? Late in the afternoon, the guests departed. Her father embraced her tightly before leaving for the suite of rooms Conrad had prepared for him in the east wing. And then they were alone, husband and wife in name, strangers in truth. Would you like to rest before dinner? Conrad asked, his voice gentle. It has been a long day. No, Margaret hesitated. I'm not tired. Then perhaps a tour of the house? You've seen parts of it, but not all. She nodded, grateful for the distraction. Conrad led her through the grand rooms of the lower floor, the formal dining room, the music room, the library with its floor-to-ceiling shelves. His hand rested lightly at the small of her back, a courteous guidance that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through her. And this, he said, opening a door on the upper floor, is your private sitting room, adjoining your bedchamber. The room was a revelation, windows overlooking the garden, walls lined with bookshelves, comfortable chairs arranged near a fireplace where flames already danced. On a small writing desk sat a vase of fresh wildflowers. It's lovely, she said, genuinely pleased. How did you know I prefer wildflowers to hothouse blooms? I observed. His voice was quiet. You admired them in the meadow when we walked at the estate. Margaret turned to him, surprised. You noticed such a small thing. I notice many things about you, Margaret. The way he said her name, soft, almost caressing, made her pulse quicken. He stood in the doorway, tall and imposing, yet his expression held none of the businesslike detachment she had come to expect. Why did you really agree to this marriage, she found herself asking. You could have had your pick of society beauties. Why choose a stranger with nothing but family connections to recommend her? Conrad stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Is that what you think? That you have nothing to recommend you? I'm being practical, as you are. My father's debts had nothing to do with my choice. He moved closer. I chose you because when I returned to England and was dragged to Lady Harrington's ball, I saw a young woman sitting apart from the crowd, reading a book hidden in her lap while the dancing continued around her. She looked real. Genuine in a sea of artifice. Margaret's lips parted in surprise. You were at Lady Harrington's ball? I don't remember seeing you. You wouldn't have. I observed from the gallery. My mother insisted I begin making appearances, but I had no desire to be paraded before eager debutantes. His mouth curved slightly. But I saw you, and I inquired about you. When I learned your father's circumstances mirrored my need for a quick, sensible match, it seemed fortuitous. So this truly was a matter of convenience. She didn't know why the confirmation stung. At first. His amber eyes held hers. But then I met you. Spoke with you. Discovered your intelligence, your quiet strength. Your loyalty to your father. Your determination to make the best of circumstances not of your choosing. He took another step toward her. And I found myself inconveniently affected. Margaret's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying that while I proposed a marriage of convenience, I find myself hoping for more. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with exquisite gentleness. If you are willing. The touch of his hand sent a tremor through her. She had told herself she didn't want romance, didn't need the complication of feelings in this practical arrangement. Yet standing here, looking into his eyes, she could no longer deny the truth. I don't know what I'm willing to risk, she whispered. This is all so new, so unexpected. Then we'll discover it together. His hand dropped to his side. I won't press you, Margaret. We have time. The respect in his voice, the restraint that clearly cost him effort, these touched her more deeply than any passionate declaration might have. On impulse, she reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. Thank you, she said softly. For your honesty. For seeing me. His fingers tightened around hers, and the promise in his eyes made her heart race with something that felt dangerously like hope. The early weeks of their marriage settled into an unexpected rhythm. Conrad rose early, spending mornings in his study attending to business correspondence. Margaret familiarized herself with the household management, developed a comfortable routine with her father, and began cautiously establishing herself in Conrad's social circle. They dined together each evening, their conversations growing easier, ranging from books to politics to childhood memories. Conrad proved to be an attentive listener, with a dry wit that often surprised a laugh from her. Sometimes their hands would brush as they reached for something at the table, and the jolt of awareness that passed between them would leave Margaret flushed and flustered. They slept in separate chambers, as was common in aristocratic marriages. Conrad had been true to his word, never pressuring, always respectful. Yet sometimes she would catch him watching her with a heat in his gaze that made her wonder what it would be like if she went to him, crossed that final boundary between them. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. One evening, Margaret sat in the library after dinner, a book open on her lap though her mind wandered far from the pages. Conrad had been called away on urgent business, and the house felt strangely empty without his presence. She had become accustomed to their evenings together, to his voice, his occasional laughter, the comfortable silences that fell between them. The door opened, and Conrad himself appeared, his hair damp from the light rain outside, his cravat loosened. You're back, she said, rising. I didn't expect you until tomorrow. I concluded matters more quickly than anticipated. He crossed to the fireplace, warming his hands. I found myself eager to return home. The simple statement warmed her more than the fire ever could. How was the meeting? She asked. Productive. Henderson agreed to the terms for the shipping contract. He glanced at her. But I'd rather not discuss business now. What were you reading? She held up the book, a volume of poetry. Wordsworth. Though I confess I was doing more thinking than reading. What thoughts occupy you this evening? He moved closer, and she caught the scent of rain and leather that clung to him. I was thinking about us. The words emerged before she could reconsider them. About how different this marriage is from what I expected. Something flickered in his eyes. Different in what way? I expected cold politeness. Distance. Instead. She hesitated. Instead, he prompted, his voice low. Instead, I find myself looking forward to our conversations. Missing you when you're away. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Wondering if you feel the same. Conrad moved closer still, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. What I feel for you defies the terms of our arrangement, Margaret. It has from the beginning. Tell me, she whispered. I feel alive when I'm with you. Interested. Challenged. His hand rose to cup her cheek. And desperately, inconveniently attracted to you. The raw honesty in his voice made her breath catch. Without thinking, she turned her face into his palm, her lips brushing his skin. Conrad made a sound low in his throat. Margaret. I don't want convenience anymore, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I want more. His amber eyes darkened. Slowly, giving her every chance to retreat, he lowered his head. When his lips met hers, the kiss was nothing like the brief, formal touch at their wedding. This was heat and hunger, restrained by tenderness. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as her hand slid up to his shoulders. When they finally parted, both breathing quickly, Conrad rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks." "Why didn't you?" she asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I promised you respect. I didn't want you to think I saw you as..." He hesitated. "As a possession," she finished. "I never thought that." "Not once." He kissed her again, more gently this time. "We should perhaps continue this conversation somewhere more private." The implication sent a thrill of nervousness and anticipation through her. She nodded, allowing him to take her hand and lead her from the library, up the stairs, toward the master bedchamber she had never entered. The room was masculine but comfortable, dark wood, rich fabrics, a large four-poster bed that made her cheeks heat. Conrad closed the door behind them but made no move to come closer, watching her with careful eyes. "We need not rush," he said quietly. "We have all the time in the world." Margaret took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I've spent my life being cautious, practical. Making the safe choice." She moved toward him. "I don't want to be cautious with you anymore." Something powerful flashed in his eyes. He crossed to her in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms. This kiss was deeper, hungrier, his hands tangling in her hair as he pulled the pins free, letting the dark waves cascade down her back. "You are so beautiful," he murmured against her throat. "From the first moment I saw you." His words emboldened her. She reached for the buttons of his waistcoat, her fingers trembling slightly. He caught her hands, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Are you certain, Margaret?" "Truly certain." She met his gaze steadily. "I am your wife. And I want to be your wife in every way." That was all the permission he needed. With gentle hands and murmured endearments, he undressed her slowly, reverently. When she stood before him in only her thin chemise, his eyes darkened with desire. "My God," he whispered. "What did I do to deserve you?" Margaret reached for him, helping him shed his own clothing until they stood together, skin to skin, heartbeat to heartbeat. When he laid her on the bed, covering her body with his own, she knew with sudden clarity that this was never meant to be a marriage of mere convenience. It was always meant to be more. Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the rumpled bedcovers. Margaret awoke slowly, aware of a pleasant soreness in her body and the solid warmth of Conrad beside her. His arm was draped possessively across her waist, his breathing deep and even in sleep. She turned carefully to look at him. In repose, his face was softer, the lines of determination smoothed away. A lock of chestnut hair fell across his forehead, making him look younger, almost vulnerable. She fought the urge to brush it back, not wanting to wake him. But as if sensing her gaze, his eyes opened, amber gold in the morning light. For a moment he simply looked at her, something like wonder in his expression. "Good morning," she whispered. "Indeed it is." His voice was rough with sleep. His hand moved up to cup her face. "I half feared I dreamed you. I'm very real." She leaned into his touch. "As is this, us." "Us," he repeated, as if savoring the word. "Margaret, I need to tell you something." A flutter of anxiety touched her. "What is it?" "When I proposed this marriage, I told you I couldn't offer romance." His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. "I was wrong. What I feel for you, it's far beyond the convenient arrangement I planned." Hope bloomed in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, Margaret Zeller. Not for your connections or for the respectability you bring to my name, but for your mind, your heart, your courage." His eyes held hers, utterly serious. "I don't expect you to return the feeling yet. But I wanted you to know." Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes. "Conrad, A sharp knock at the door interrupted her. Conrad frowned, sitting up. "What is it?" he called. The door remained closed, but the butler's voice came through. "I apologize for the disturbance, my lord, but there is an urgent matter requiring your attention. A messenger has arrived from your mother's estate." Conrad was instantly alert. "I'll be down in a moment." He turned to Margaret, regret in his eyes. "I must see what this is about." "Of course." She reached for her dressing gown as he pulled on his clothes quickly. He paused at the door, looking back at her. "We'll continue our conversation later." But the conversation would have to wait longer than either anticipated. The messenger brought grave news: Conrad's mother had taken a serious turn for the worse. Within the hour, they were in a carriage headed for his family estate in Hampshire, the urgent pace leaving little opportunity for private conversation. Lady Zeller lay pale and frail in her massive bed, her once vibrant face now hollow with illness. When Conrad entered her chamber, the relief in her eyes was palpable. "My son," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "You came." "Of course I came, mother." He sat beside her, his large hand gentle around her fragile one. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm dying, which we both know I am." Despite her weakness, there was a spark of her old spirit in her voice. "Where is your wife?" "The servants tell me you finally married." Conrad glanced at Margaret, who stood hesitantly in the doorway. "Come in, my dear. Meet my mother." Margaret approached the bed, her heart aching for this proud woman reduced to such frailty. "Lady Zeller, I'm honored to meet you." The old woman's sharp eyes studied her face. "So you're the one who captured my impossible son." She gestured weakly. "Come closer. Let me see you properly." Margaret leaned down, allowing the older woman to examine her. Whatever Lady Zeller saw seemed to satisfy her. A small smile touched her lips. "You'll do," she said simply. "You have intelligence in your eyes. And strength." She looked at Conrad. "You chose better than I expected." Conrad's hand tightened around Margaret's. "I did." The next days passed in a blur of physicians, hushed conversations, and long vigils by the sickbed. Margaret found herself taking charge of the household, organizing the care Lady Zeller required, ensuring Conrad ate and rested when he could be convinced to leave his mother's side. The private conversation they had begun in London remained unfinished, suspended in the gravity of Lady Zeller's decline. On the fourth night, as Margaret brought tea to Conrad in his mother's chamber, Lady Zeller stirred from what had seemed a deep sleep. "You make a good couple," she said suddenly, her voice surprisingly clear. "I worried he would marry someone vapid and pretty, with no substance." Conrad looked up, startled. "Mother, you should rest." "I'll rest soon enough." She fixed her gaze on Margaret. "He works too hard. Always has. Need someone to remind him there's more to life than ledgers and shipping contracts." Margaret moved to the bedside. "I'll do my best, Lady Zeller." "Eleanor," the old woman corrected. "We're family now." Her eyes moved to her son. "Conrad, I need you to fetch the box from my dressing table. The small rosewood one." When he returned with it, she gestured weakly for him to open it. Inside lay a ring, an emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds in an antique gold setting. "Your grandmother's," she said. "Given to me when your father and I married. Now it should go to your wife." Conrad lifted the ring, turning to Margaret with a question in his eyes. She nodded, extending her hand. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, their eyes met over Lady Zeller's bed, and the unspoken words between them seemed to fill the room. Lady Zeller watched them with a satisfied expression. "Good," she murmured. "That's good." Her eyelids fluttered. "I'm tired now. But I die happier knowing you won't be alone, my son." She slipped into sleep, her breathing growing more labored as the night progressed. Near dawn, with Conrad on one side of her bed and Margaret on the other, Lady Eleanor Zeller drew her final breath. The funeral was held 3 days later in the small church on the estate grounds. Margaret stood beside Conrad as he received condolences, her hand firm in his, offering silent support. He maintained his composure throughout the service and burial, his face a mask of dignified grief. It was only later, when they were alone in the library of the estate house, that the mask finally cracked. Margaret found him standing before the fire, a glass of untouched brandy in his hand, staring into the flames. "Conrad," she said softly. He turned, and the raw pain in his eyes made her heart clench. Without a word, she went to him, taking the glass from his hand and setting it aside before drawing him into her arms. For a moment he stood rigid, and then with a sound like something breaking, he buried his face against her neck. She held him as his shoulders shook, her hand stroking his back, murmuring soft words of comfort. When at last he grew still, he didn't pull away but held her tighter, as if she were an anchor in a storm. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "For being here. For everything these past days." "Where else would I be?" she asked simply. "You're my husband." He lifted his head, looking down at her with reddened eyes. "Is that all I am to you?" "A husband in name." Margaret reached up to touch his face. "You know it isn't. What began as convenience has become." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Essential. Necessary." She took a deep breath. "I love you, Conrad. I think perhaps I have from the moment you told me you noticed me reading at that ball." The grief in his eyes didn't disappear, but it was joined by something warmer, something like hope. "Say it again," he whispered. "I love you." She smiled up at him. "Inconvenient as that may be for our practical arrangement." A rough laugh escaped him. He cradled her face in his hands as if she were something infinitely precious. "I love you, Margaret Zeller. Beyond reason, beyond convenience. Beyond anything I ever expected to feel." When he kissed her, she tasted the salt of tears and the promise of tomorrow. His arms encircled her, drawing her against the solid strength of his chest, and she knew with absolute certainty that what had begun as a marriage of convenience had transformed into something far more rare and precious. Love, unexpected and undeniable. Later, as they lay together in the darkness of his childhood bedroom, Margaret's head pillowed on his chest, Conrad spoke quietly into the night. "My mother knew," he said, his fingers trailing through Margaret's hair. "She saw what was between us immediately. She was a remarkable woman." Margaret traced patterns on his skin. "I wish I could have known her better. She would have adored you." His arm tightened around her. "When we return to London, I think we should host a dinner. Begin establishing our home as a place where friends gather." Margaret lifted her head to look at him. "Are you certain? So soon after?" "Life continues," he said simply. "And for the first time in many years, I find myself wanting to embrace it fully." His hand caressed her cheek. "With you." In the moonlight filtering through the window, his amber eyes held a promise that took her breath away, not just of passion or comfort or security, but of a future built on the most solid foundation of all. A love that had grown not from romantic fantasy but from respect, understanding, and the gradual unveiling of two souls to each other. What had begun with a business-like proposal and a practical agreement had blossomed into something neither of them had dared to hope for. As Conrad pulled her close for another kiss, Margaret knew that their marriage would never be merely convenient again. It would be extraordinary.